Welcome, everybody. It is a personal thrill to welcome to our great city of New Orleans someone who has not only shaped journalism, but has inspired really generations, including me. Connie Chung broke the barrier after barrier, becoming the first Asian American and the second woman ever to co-anchor a national network evening news show. And to all those young people out here that have no idea what a network evening news show is, let me tell you, it's a big deal. It was a big, big deal. So Connie's calm and commanding presence on screen really made her a trusted voice during some of the most important issues of our time. But behind the legacy on camera, and that's what I love about this book, is a story of grit and grace and a lot of humor. And she shares it so honestly in her book. And it's just a pleasure to be able to talk to this trailblazer. And I know you will love her new book, Connie, a Memoir. And so we're delighted to have you here, Connie. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Betsy worked for years at NBC, and I had left NBC just when
I regret that. Just as I was coming in, and you were leaving.
And one of the greatest things is, if you remember Meet the Press with Tim Russert, she produced that for 17 years.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah. And Connie was certainly somebody that, in my generation, coming up in news, of course, everyone knew and admired, and it's just a treat to be able to talk to you today. So I want to jump right in on this memoir, because writing for television is a lot different than writing for a book, right?
Sure is. I mean, television is like that long,
yeah,
you know?
We got like 120 and you're out.
Yeah, it was so actually easy compared to writing a book.
Wow. Yeah. And why now did you decide to write this book?
It was actually my husband who said, "You've got a story to tell." You know my husband, Maury Povich, who's been determining the paternity of every child in America. But I can assure you he has a wider vocabulary than "you are the father" or "you are not the father." He's actually starting a podcast, because I always said to him, you know, you're a history buff, you're a political buff, why don't you just sit and interview people instead of finding out who the baby daddy is? And so he's going to do a podcast. So it's called On Par with Maury Povich, and it's like, you know, a regular interview program. But anyway, it was he who said, "You've got a story to tell." And I kept saying, nah. And he encouraged me, and he was throughout my career, I'm going to give him props right now. He was the guy who supported me in mentally. I supported myself, but in terms of money. But he was really my foundation. So if you got a partner in crime, it certainly is great.
And while we're on this topic of Maury, what I love in the book is that you give a lot of background and the story of you two, but you all met at a local television station in Washington, D.C. At the very beginning of your career.
Yes, and he was a big star, and I was just a copy person, just chopped liver. And he, you know, I was just a little guy, and all I did was bring wire copy to people, and it's called a, you know, gopher job. Go for coffee, go for this, anything that anybody asks you to do.
We've all done it, right?
Yeah, that's how you start.
Yeah.
But the only job they had open was for a secretary when I graduated from college, and that's what they offered women back in 1969, secretarial jobs. We couldn't break out of that kind of syndrome. So, so I took it, and then when a writing job came up, I said, I want to do that. I want to be the writer for the Anchorman. And they said, well, you have to replace yourself. So I went to the bank where I cashed my check, my measly little check. And there was this really cute teller who was dishing out my little measly check. And I said, "You want to be a big star across the street?" And she said, "Yeah." So she came over, she became the secretary, and I became the writer. Yes.
Well, it was that sort of grit that really paid off because you were working on a story and impressed the Washington bureau chief of CBS News.
Yeah, Betsy, I was so aggressive that I wanted to be Mike Wallace, you know, who was on 60 Minutes. So there was a story about health violations at restaurants in Washington, D.C. And one of them was this Tony French restaurant called Le Provençal. And so I barged in there and I demanded to see the owner. But there, sitting there having lunch, was the bureau chief of CBS News. He saw me, sorry. He saw me in action, and he gave me his card, and he said, "Call me." So I figured, let's see, it'll be about 20 minutes when he'll be back at his office. And I called him, and I got a job as a reporter. So I was at...
Amazing.
Well,
What a great story.
It was wonderful because at that time, CBS, which is in the toilet now, was the Tiffany network. And it was Walter Cronkite, if you remember him, was anchoring the news, and the Washington Bureau was the creme de la creme.
And when we think about women in journalism, it's interesting because your future sister-in-law
Yes.
really had an impact on you getting that job, unbeknownst to you at the time.
Huge, huge. My sister-in-law's name is Lynn Povich. She was working at Newsweek as a researcher and sometimes allowed to write. But for the most part, all the women were pigeonholed in research jobs. They were not allowed to advance to writer, nor reporter, nor editor, anything in the higher echelons of the newsroom. So she and the other women met in the ladies' room, the only place they could get some privacy. And they cooked up an idea because the 1964 Civil Rights Law was passed, which created the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. And that allowed them to file a class action lawsuit of discrimination against women. And they won. And Lynn Povich eventually became the first senior editor of Newsweek. So because of what Lynn did, all the networks, the TV networks and every news organization was afraid that they would get a lawsuit too. So they got off their antiquated you-know-whats and decided that they would hire women. That's why I was hired along with 3 other women, Leslie Stahl, Sylvia Chase, and Michelle Clark. Michelle Clark died in a plane crash. Sylvia Chase has already passed, but Leslie Stahl is still doing 60 Minutes.
Incredible.
And she's my buddy.
That's so, what a great story. So you write in the book, and I love that you put parts of the book of television talk. You're like, let's rewind the tape. Yeah. And so you have in the book, let's rewind the tape and talk about how I came to this country, talk about your parents and how they made you the person you are and your heritage, they coming from pre-communist China. Mm-hmm. So tell a little bit about that arrival story.
At the time they were born, my mother was born in 1911, my father was born in 1909. My mother's feet their parents were so traditional that my mother's feet were actually bound, bound in gauze so that they would remain tiny. And that was as inexplicable as Victorian waists that were tiny. They were supposed to make the woman more desirable for marriage. Crazy, but she complained a lot, so she didn't have her feet bound for a long, long time because it hurt. Their marriage was arranged. They were engaged unbeknownst to to them not even knowing the other person at ages 12 and 14. And they were forced to be married at 17 and 19 because their parents had arranged this marriage. And it was something that both my parents didn't want to have anything to do with. My mother had grown up in a very cloistered Chinese traditional family, and she had to marry this man who didn't want to have anything to do with her. He, though, eventually became a spy, a spook, and he worked for Chinese intelligence. He was basically a CIA for the Chiang Kai-shek government, which at the time, during the Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese were moving south and gobbling up various towns, but the communists were also infiltrating parts of the mainland. My father, having worked for the government of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, which was the nationalist government, decided that he was going to get out of Dodge. So he found a way to get the family out, and it was quite ingenious. He was a sneaky Pete, and he got everybody, 4 older sisters, out. I was the last one born in the United States, the only one born in the United States. But one of the things that was key was that my parents had 9 children. Of the 9, 5 died as infants. And of those 5, 3 were boys. In China, all you want are boys. You don't want girls. I mean, girls are useless to traditional Chinese people. They just want boys to carry on the family name. So, when I got into the news business, my father sort of wrote me this letter that said, basically, maybe you can carry on the name Chung the way sons do. And essentially, he was saying, maybe you can be the son Mommy and I never had. And I think I took that seriously. I tried to make the name Chung memorable in history, but unwittingly. I mean, I now realize that I really took it seriously because I was a very dutiful Chinese girl.
Your first name is also very interesting, how Connie came about, because your 4 older sisters had something to say about that.
Well, you mean how they named
Yes.
me? Well, when I was born, the 10th child, and yet another girl, my father called, it's another girl, why don't you name her? So they went to a movie magazine with a picture of a different movie star on each magazine. It was the precursor of, it was called Photoplay or Movie Screen or something like that. And it was the precursor of People magazine. So they said the first one we flip to is going to be her name. Fortunately, it wasn't John Wayne. It was Constance Moore, a grade B actress who was in Westerns. And so I became Constance. But nobody ever called me Constance. They always called me Connie.
I love that. What a great story. So talk a little bit about your parents are here in the United States. You were born. Their life was much different here. It was much more difficult than it was back in China.
There was, they were rather privileged, actually, but they were middle class, upper middle class, but relatively privileged because their parents were business people. One owned a paper factory and another one owned a jewelry store. So the business people tended to have servants, cooks and maids and nannies and all that stuff. Coming here, my mother was shocked that she had to cook and clean and do housework, and she
5 girls and
5 girls, and didn't have a washing machine. She washed clothes on a washboard, and so it was pretty rough. My father worked 7 days a week.
And you grew up in D.C. for the most part, a couple of moves back and forth, but the story of how you kind of came into journalism and politics is such a Washington story.
Yeah.
I wanted you to tell that because you're walking the halls of Capitol Hill with a friend of yours, and what happens?
We run into a creepy old congressman, and, and he was from New York, and I call this look that creepy old men give you, I say that I could see the sperm swimming in their eyes. It's like, and it's like, and I'm going, give me a break. I know that look. And I tell you, Henry Kissinger used to give me, he used to flirt with me. John Mitchell, the Attorney General, used to flirt with me. And I'm thinking, I would never even help you cross the street, dude. So anyway, so he's this creepy old guy, and he gives me his card, and he says, if you ever want to work, on the Hill, I'll give you an internship. And I thought, I had worked every summer, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll try it, and because, I had never been working on the Hill. So I learned a lot, and I was fascinated with what the reporters did. And to me, since I grew up on the Washington Post, all the reporters, were circling around, and I was watching them as they popped questions at people and running through the marble staircases and trying to get information, and I was just intoxicated by it and decided I want to be a reporter too.
That was it. So this is a good segue of men looking at Connie, because we have a photo from 1971 when she was working at WTTG. She's in the White House. There's President Nixon, and everybody's looking right at you, Connie. You're the only one.
I don't know how come, and
I think it was the little mini skirt there.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, well it
70s.
was the 70s.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was okay. I wasn't like I wasn't looking like a hooker, really.
That was the style. And you were quite styling. I mean, some of these pictures of you back then, you were always dressed to the nines.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Very stylish, very stylish. So you're at TTG, you get this big break at CBS, and you are just now in a place where you never thought you would be. There's Walter Cronkite, and as you called it, Uncle Walter, someone that you grew up watching on television, and now you're working with him.
And it's amazing. He was a very, very nice man, unlike the other anchorman who I eventually
We'll get
met.
to that in a minute.
Okay. He didn't have this attitude.
Yeah.
He was just a good journalist, credible, unbiased, and he was the best.
And you talked about some of the male anchors, like the big shot-itis.
Yeah,
I love that term, and we've all seen it.
They
right?
suffered from a disease that I call big shot-itis, which was an inability to stop talking, unrelenting hubris. What are some of my other...
The ego.
Yes. Huge egos. You couldn't fit them in Madison Square Garden, even if there was no game there. and the one that my favorite, because it was so audacious, was that they had delusions of sexual prowess.
Yeah.
I found them to be insufferable, frankly. And it was a very common trait because the place was filled with men. In other words, the newsroom at CBS, there was only one woman, and then, oh dear, and Leslie Stahl and me, but primarily it was all men. Not only the men in the newsroom at CBS, but at NBC, ABC, and any competitive reporter, male was male. The people I covered at the White House, at the Pentagon, at the State Department, on Capitol Hill, men everywhere.
And as sort of the low woman on the totem pole, you were expected to report, but then hand off your reporting to the big shots.
Yes, yes.
Frequently.
We were relegated to gathering information and then turning it over to the big star. And anytime I tried to buck that, I was whack, whack. You know, you can't do that. You're just a little. So I had a hard time abiding by those rules, because if I found something out and I thought it was my story.
And then you go in 1972 to cover the presidential campaign. You were essentially on the boys on the bus, and you. Mm-hmm. And you had to learn some reporting techniques pretty quickly in terms of getting information, right? And staying out with the boys at night, and
you bet.
Figuring out how information goes back and forth.
There was a book written by Timothy Krause called The Boys on the Bus, and I was one of the boys on the bus. And he said in his book that it's actually a very good book if you want to pick it up. It was about the 1972 George McGovern campaign. He was running against President Nixon's reelection. And unbeknownst to all of us, that was when Watergate occurred. But anyway, I was on the McGovern campaign, and Tim wrote that I was always in bed, tucked in bed, doing my last radio report before I went to sleep, and up and at him early in the morning, sticking a microphone in McGovern's face, asking him an important question of the day. And then I'd find out that the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Boston Globe would break these stories. And I said, how did they do that? They were down at the bar. They were getting the McGovern aides drunk, and they would spill the beans. And so I said, no more being tucked in bed. So I knew how to drink from college. So I went, yeah, right? So then I went down to the bar and I drank with the boys. It was terrific. That was the way I could get stories too. Can I tell them about one time what I said?
Oh, is this the potty mouth?
Yes.
Yes, love it.
I had a terrible potty mouth. And the only way I could sort of be one of the guys was to talk like them. So, and I don't recommend it, but it was my MO. So there was this one guy, the Boston Globe reporter said, reminded me of this story. He said, he kept coming up to you and trying to get you to play ball. And I, was ignoring him. And he wouldn't let up. And the Boston Globe reporter said, just before I was about to stand up and just punch the guy in the nose, you said, you don't want to sleep with me. An hour later, you'll be horny again. It was, I don't have to explain it, do I?
Your granddaughter down here is embarrassed.
I know. I know. She said, don't embarrass me, okay? But her name is Charlie Gorham. And she's sitting right in front. She's a straight A student. She's a sophomore, and now
Yay.
she's really shaking her head.
Sorry, Charlie.
Okay.
So we have another great photo of you. So this is after the election, of course, Nixon, Watergate, impeachment hearings, and you're assigned to cover the impeachment hearings. And there you are.
And you can see that I'm like really, and I don't remember, feeling that way, but you can see, I call this picture the sea of men, because you look around and they're just men. And
And this picture went viral.
It did go viral. It became what's called a mood. You know, hashtag mood, which means I so get what she's thinking or what she's feeling.
So someone
I've been
posted
there.
it on, yeah, someone posted on Twitter and said
Yeah.
that they had this put up in their office because
Yeah.
it really was something for them to kind of look at when they were in a mood and could really see how things were, right?
Because things actually haven't changed a whole lot for women.
Right.
You're unfortunately still going to encounter piggish behavior. So, you know, we just got to keep fighting it.
So you had a decision to make, though, that was really tough because you had this job at CBS News. There you are with Walter Cronkite. You're getting on the air sometimes, but you're not one of the big dogs. And you had a kind of a fork in the road because you got a great offer to be an anchor at the affiliate in Los Angeles, one of the top markets. And you had to decide whether you wanted to go do that or stay and see if you could move up at CBS. How did you decide to make that jump to LA, and what did that mean for your career?
Well, my father had retired because he had a minor heart attack, and I became the breadwinner of the family. It was very much, I actually related to Barbara Walters, if you remember her. She also became the breadwinner in her family. So her father's nightclubs had tanked, and so then she supported her parents and her sister. And I ended up doing the same. I supported my parents not only financially, but emotionally and all the rest. So I really needed the job, and I needed to make more money. So at the time I was at CBS, I just didn't think I could advance. They did offer me anchoring the morning program, but anytime I had substituted, nobody watched the morning program, and I felt like I was in the witness protection program. And
So everybody was watching the Today Show, right?
yes,
Yeah.
they were watching Barbara Walters on the Today Show. And so I decided I'm gonna also, I know I am so embarrassed to say that I was still living at home. Here I was, this hotshot CBS News reporter working for the Tiffany Network, and I was still living under my parents' roof at age 29. It was so embarrassing. So I said, I gotta get out of Dodge, and I did. I moved to LA and began anchoring the news, and I felt like, you know, it's late, but I'm growing up. I mean, I finally am acting like a grown-up.
And you're having a great time there. You've got a great apartment, and then you get a call from your parents.
They said, we're coming out to live near you. And I said, so I couldn't say no. You know, there's something about being this dutiful Chinese daughter, that I just couldn't say no. So out they came, and the role reversal was even more profound. I was really taking care of them, and it was kind of, you know, I felt like I was in a straitjacket, frankly.
But meanwhile, you're like meeting Warren Beatty, you're kind of coming into the Hollywood scene, enjoying your life as a single woman.
Well, I decided that there was this I had done a story on a doctor, and he was so incensed by my story that he put a private detective on me. And a few years later, the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, said that this private detective had a file on you, and it said that you never did anything wrong. You didn't give wild parties, you weren't doing drugs, you'd go to work, you'd come home. You had a very boring social life. So I said, I'm dumping this MO, and I decided I would go out and have some fun, you know? And so I started accepting all kinds of crazy, well, the way Maury puts it, because we we started dating, and then Maury said to me, "You're out there effing, yeah." And I said, and he was in Philadelphia, and I said, "You can't even remember the first names, let alone the last names of the people that you're effing."
So,
Oh, Charlie is going.
poor Charlie.
Oh, Charlie.
It's all in the book, folks. It's all in the book.
It's all in the book. I didn't say that, did I?
So you and Maury are then sort of doing this long distance relationship. You're out in LA for several years.
Yeah, 7.
And you've been anchoring, and then all of a sudden, you've got some options now.
Yep.
And maybe coming back to the East Coast.
Yeah.
And there what brought you back? What made you decide to come back into network news?
I really felt that I had enough of being 3 hours behind the news.
Yeah.
And the pulse speed of news was really on the East Coast. So I went to NBC, your home, which became later your home. And it was actually, when I started out there, I was very happy because it was Tom Brokaw was anchoring the news, and I had a lot of jobs. So I was working 24/7, and it was going well.
But you really revitalized their the Sunday show, the morning show to go into the Today Show, Sunrise. And they needed that show to succeed so that it would build up an audience for the Today Show. And you did that.
I did. The reason why is the networks like NBC, ABC, and CBS at the time, which are now evaporating, are only as strong as their affiliates, the little stations all across the country. And what I found out was that one of the reasons why the early morning broadcast was not didn't have good ratings was because not everybody was carrying it. So I called Atlanta, the general manager, and said, "Would you please carry this early morning broadcast preceding the Today Show?" Then I called Boston, and I called Detroit, and they all said, "Okay," because it's unusual to have somebody call them and say,
especially the anchor of the
yes.
show.
And once they did, the viewers came. If you build it, they will come. So it was great.
But that time too, you write in the book about, still, this is, fast forward several years, and here you are, at the Today Show, Jane Pauley and Bryant Gumbel are anchoring, but Jane Pauley can't say the first good morning. It has to be him that says the good morning.
Can you believe
in
that?
The contract.
Yeah, in his contract. And it's pretty incredible, the disparity between the male and the female anchors. And she even preceded him. She had longevity. And so it was really, the anchorman thing was alive and well, the big shot-itis. And all the women experienced it in spades.
Yeah. And then you left NBC to go back to your home at CBS, and you were there a little bit, and you had written in your contract, or your agent wrote in your TV contract, that if Dan Rather, who was the host of CBS Evening News, was to ever have a co-anchor, it would be you. And you thought, that'll never happen.
Never, ever happened, because there were no women. It was all men. It was Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, and Peter Jennings.
The big three.
The big three. And they all wanted to be Walter Cronkite. They never achieved that, not one of them. But, Walter was omnipresent. He ruled the roost. And they all wanted to capture that same big audience. But in battling for the top ratings at the time, which this was a period that preceded CNN and any cable, MSNBC, Fox News, digital. It just preceded the paradigm that we're now dealing with, this digital media. And so the big three networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, were it. So when I went to CBS, I thought, this is great, but what I soon realized, they said that the stains on the industrial carpet at NBC were coffee, but at CBS, the stains were blood. It was rough.
Rough. The whole world, I mean, it was definitely a rough scene, but the evening news wasn't doing well. They thought maybe a solution, you had been successful at NBC. Solution is to have a co-anchor. And from day one, Dan Rather wasn't having much of it.
No, he had sat in the chair all by himself for many years, and he just didn't want to share the chair. He had to move over a few inches, and seriously, and he didn't want to. And he made it pretty clear to me in so many words that and my girlfriend, Leslie Stahl, said he wouldn't have wanted anybody, not a man, not a woman. And I think that's probably true. He wouldn't even have wanted to share the seat with a plant.
Yeah.
I mean, or a dog. I mean, it's just, we really had his backup, I think.
But he made it difficult even from the beginning for you. I mean, it's one of his first comments you write was, congratulations, Connie, you're going to have to start reading the newspaper now.
Yeah. I go, ooh, I mean, what do you think I've been reading, dude?
Yeah. And it kind of went downhill from there. And, he wanted the best of both worlds, right? He wanted to be out in the field, but then he also wanted to be in the anchor desk for big stories.
Yeah.
And you were sort of a ping pong in the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I didn't, I was so, enthralled with the idea of sitting in half of Uncle Walter's chair.
Yes.
That I thought, this is going to work. It's going to be great. We're going to do it, I go, duh. You got to have both people wanting to make it work.
And so talk a little bit about, because when all of this is happening and right before you left NBC, you and Maury were married, and you all tried for many years to have a child of your own together.
Yeah.
And you struggled with that.
Well, basically, first I forgot to get married, and then I forgot to have a baby. And it was like, my husband kept saying to me, Maury kept saying, I know you want to have a baby. And I'd say, yeah, but, I got a convention to cover. I've got the election. This is an election year. I just can't, And once I started thinking about it, once he took my birth control pills away from me, I went, no. No. And he said, nah. So it was late,
You were older.
and women just you can't snap your fingers and say, okay, now. It just doesn't work that way. So my body, I soon discovered, had immunity issues. And so I was having miscarriages. And so that was the problem. Finally, Maury kept saying, let's adopt, because he hated seeing me go through in vitro fertilization, which was, I considered it like covering a story. Let me find out what's going on.
Do the reporting and figure it out.
Yeah. And I finally found out that I had these immunity issues, and we proceeded to adopt. We were going to adopt a little Maury and a little Connie, a Chinese girl from China and an American boy, and or actually what we told our adoption lawyer was, can you find half and half? And he said, you'll be dead by then.
So you were the stepmother to Maury's 2 teenage daughters.
Yes.
And you had this, you left NBC. Read the story in the book. It's kind of heartbreaking what they made you do when you left.
Oh,
That-
it was CBS. You know, you mean,
When you left NBC and they made you say that the reason you were leaving is because you were pregnant.
oh, here, I think when you know what it was? It was at CBS, actually.
Oh.
When I was, they were going to cancel
The show. Yes, the magazine show. And they made you say it was getting
Because
canceled
I was
because
trying to have a baby.
You were trying to have a baby.
Yeah, and I thought, because the program wasn't, we weren't putting stories in the can for the summer, which is shoot a whole bunch of things,
Yes.
have it on the shelf, ready to roll in September. I would be unable to anchor and report that program. It was called Face to Face with Connie Chung at CBS.
CBS.
And
This was before you did the evening news then.
that's, oh no, yes.
Yes.
That's correct. And they said, just tell them you're trying to have a baby. And I decided, I don't know why. It's this dutiful Chinese daughter kind of thing. Whenever the male boss, and they all were male, they weren't even women.
Yeah.
Would say to me, you got to do this. You got to do this for the team. You got to. I would say okay. I shrink and say okay. I had 5 sets of balls in covering stories and getting stories and being aggressive and everything. But when the boss would tell me, you got to do this for the team, I just found it really hard to say no. So I did, and the proverbial what hit the fan, and I ended up. It was so embarrassing.
Yeah, that was.
It was People magazine put me on the cover that said, "I want a baby." And I was like, "Oh God."
Yeah, and all that had to play out in public.
I felt worse than Charlie does right now.
Yeah. And so then you're struggling in the evening news. Rather is horrendous to you, and maybe mercifully, they decided to pull the plug on it.
Just like Barbara Walters. See, I really related to Barbara because she had been named to co-anchor with a man named Harry Reisner, and he despised her. And I, too, was anchoring with someone who despised me. And so she lasted 2 years, I lasted 2 years, and then they dumped me. But
one door closes, another one opens.
Love that cliche. My sister uttered it because 2 days later, we got a call from our adoption lawyer saying, Matthew is going to be your son. He's going to be born very shortly. And it was serendipitous. It was serendipitous. I was like, oh my God, this was so meant to be. So there we were. We had Matthew in our arms. He was less than a day old. He was like 17 hours. And he was in our arms. Once we went through the sleepless nights, we said, forget about the Chinese girl.
Yeah,
we are so tired.
But you all had to do, because of all this, People magazine, paparazzi, all of this news, you had to do a little bit of a cloak and dagger even to get Matthew home and out of the public eye and out of the tabloids.
Oh, yeah, we did. The National Enquirer and all those tabloids have plants all over the place, at adoption agencies, at airports, and if they they have them on retainer, people on retainer. So you know how you see, when you're at the supermarket and you see these pictures of people trying to, these movie stars or something trying to sneak around, and then they catch a picture of him with her and people canoodling. That's what they get tips. So we stayed at my girlfriend's house because we didn't want to stay in a hotel and suddenly show up with the baby. So, so then the National Enquirer actually found out. They started making suspicious calls to my sisters, to all kinds of people, trying to find out what we had done, because they suspected that we had adopted a baby. So we came up with this little plan of, first Maury flies to Washington, then he flies here, and then, then I fly directly to New York, and our lawyer picks up our baby, and he had 3 children, so he knew what to do with a baby. And
changing diapers.
Yes, although on the plane ride, he got sprayed by our son. He said, "Thanks a lot, kid." But it all worked out.
It all worked out.
But I kind of stayed cloistered with our baby for a while because I was afraid that somebody would take a picture of us.
Yeah, that must have been really hard. And then talk a little bit about what motherhood has meant to you after, going through this cutthroat career. Like you said, you kind of came to motherhood a little bit later in life, and you were able to take a little bit of time.
Well,
it was great.
It's really hard, I think, for women to have it all at the same time. For me, it worked out beautifully. Had a career for a long time, and then I was able to concentrate on our son, and it worked for me. But I think, today's women are much more able to mix personal life and professional life. It's still incredibly hard. I think women take on much more responsibility for these, for home and work. When we're at work, we think about what we have to do at home. When we're at home, we think about what we have to do at work. And men don't seem to do that. They are able to compartmentalize. When they're at work, they're at work. When they're at home, they're at home. And they don't get all concerned about trying to be perfect. So I think, in our burning desire to be perfect, it's, if I may, you don't have to be perfect. Now, that's easier said than done because we all want to be perfecto. And I have such a hard time to this day. But if I can advise women, don't try to do it all. And tell him to do something.
Yeah.
But the best thing is that I think the younger men today are doing more. They, like our son cooks. He loves to cook. And he and his fiancée cook together. And they have, he can be, piggy about some things, but I'm always trying to get him to understand the balance of doing things that are not written in some rule book that only women do. I mean, I want to see that book, that says women do this and this. Women remember their husbands' birthdays. Their husband's parents' birthday.
Right.
Women take care of Christmas cards. Women take care of, the kids' birthday parties or whatever. It's just endless. And if the men can pitch in, and I think they do, today's men do, but if you're married to an old fart, you've got no chance, you know. Except my husband actually is very good with, he's not great about sharing household duties, but he was great at supporting me.
Yeah.
He actually wanted to be Walter Cronkite, and what he did was he gave up that dream for himself and wanted it for me. So it's, he's a great guy.
So Matthew is a young little boy, but you decided to go back into the business and had a career at ABC News, where you got plucked in the middle of like female anchor fighting between Barbara Walters and Diane Sawyer.
Yeah.
You're like, are any of these networks functional places? The answer is no.
Yeah, you're right. The answer is no. I thought that, you know, with Barbara and Diane there, that we would be a triumvirate, and we would battle, you know, Peter Jennings and Ted Koppel and the men. You know, we'd be like, what a force. But no, they were shooting darts at each other. They were in this royal battle between each other. And I was getting, pew, pew. I was getting caught in the crossfire. So it was crazy. And I couldn't understand it, because I think Barbara deserved her props.
Right.
And if she wanted to be a diva, fine. I had no problem, because I think she really paved the way for so many of us. And I kind of decided that I was going to take my own path, and I would do, and this sounds corny, but journalism to me is great when we can right a wrong, when we can find something that the government is doing that is wrong. And there's so much today. It's so rich with wrong things that there is no time that is more important than today for journalists to dig in and use the fourth estate, what we were created to do, and that was to make speak truth to power and make government wrongs right. It's absolutely critical not for us to shrink. And thank goodness for Jeffrey Goldberg, who inadvertently received, he was the most responsible person among them. He didn't publish everything until they started climbing all over him like a cheap suit. And then they went, and then he published what was in that chat. So it's so important that we don't shrink the way, certainly, you know, my older daughter, Susan, who, she worked for Paul Weiss, and she was pretty...
law firm.
Mm-hmm. And then she was pretty disillusioned by the corporate insanity that ensues in corporate law. But it's not unlike news divisions and hospital administrations, corporations. The corporate mentality is so insidious that what happens is, you know, Paul Weiss caved. And I was just reading an article. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, now too we have the you know, corporate power over television networks, exuding, in my opinion, more power now over what happens in the news for political reasons than in the past.
Yeah.
Settling lawsuits and all the rest, right?
Yes. When I was working for CBS, it was owned by a man named William Paley, and he basically created CBS. CBS was #1 in news with Walter Cronkite at the helm, and #1 in entertainment. He felt that news should be autonomous. So he would tell the CBS correspondents, he'd have an annual lunch with them, and he would say, don't worry about money. You go ahead and spend the money because I want you to get the news and tell the truth and be credible and be unbiased and be truthful up and down the line. He said, I have the entertainment division making money for me. So we had free reign to spend money like crazy to get the news. It's not that way anymore.
Yeah, those days are unfortunately over.
Absolutely over.
Well, I wanted to end on something really special, and your impact on journalism and your trailblazing career has sort of spawned this next generation of Connies. So tell us the story about meeting some of these Connies, and then we have a fun piece of videotape to play.
One day in, I think it was 2019, a young woman cold emailed me. Her name was Connie Wang, W-A-N-G. And she, when she told me what she told me in her email, I said, we gotta talk. She said that when she was 3 years old, her parents came from communist China. They settled in the Midwest. And when she was only 3 years old, she said, her parents said, we have to give you an American name. What name would you like? And she only knew what she saw on television. So she said, Connie or Elmo. Thank goodness they chose the human over the Muppet. So she became Connie, and then she went to UC Berkeley. And she, unbeknownst to her, or to me, it has a huge Asian population. So she's in the cafeteria and somebody says, Connie, and like half the room turns around. And she's going, what's going on? And then she goes and tries to get her email address at college, and she can't get Connie. And she realizes something's up. So she became a journalist. She was working for Refinery 29, and she said, I'm going to look into this Connie thing. And she found, remarkably, huge numbers, untold numbers of Connies. And they were named by their Asian parents as babies after me. And, yeah, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. And I'm like, what? So when my husband has always said, you're the Jackie Robinson, I would always say, nah. And then
let's roll the videotape.
Yeah,
and here's Connie meeting the Connies.
Yes. Hi. Yes. So good to see you. Hi, Connie.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
How are you?
Finally, yeah.
Yeah. What is your last name?
Aramaki.
Armaki. Okay.
Yeah. But my
you're-
real name's Chung, actually.
Get out.
My parents made me Connie Chung Aramaki, so I'd really be like you.
Yeah. You're Connie Wang. And you pronounce it Wang?
Yeah, I actually named myself after you.
You did?
Not my parents. I did.
You mean just
Because I
in your
admire you
crib?
so much.
No. How did you do that?
Because you're iconic person.
Oh my God.
And I admire female.
Oh my God. I know, me too. Really?
Yeah.
How old were you when you named you
After
me?
college, I wanted to have some American name, and I didn't want to have Esther, Sarah. Yeah, I admire you so much.
Oh my God. No, I'm gonna ruin my makeup.
Okay, quick, everybody laugh.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh my God. Nice to meet you.
That must have been so special. That must have been so special for you.
I'll never forget it, you
Yeah.
know. It
I
was
mean, what a great, and it just shows you the power of representation and what all of these young women can learn from you and admired you.
Well, I just had no idea that this was even remotely possible. Connie Wong wrote a piece for the New York Times opinion
Yes,
section.
it's a great
And the photographer, the photo editor was the one who brought us together.
All together.
And the story is called Generation Connie. And it was...
It's such a great piece. It's such a great piece. And I mean, I think this is the perfect way to kind of end our discussion, Connie, because it does show that kind of ripple effect that you've had in this field of journalism. And I think it's the great way to end our discussion and thank Connie for being here with us today. And it's been so wonderful.
Oh my God.